Hypertime to podcast.
What is up, everyone? Welcome into the Hypertime to podcast. I'm your host, Josh Miller, and let me tell you, I think we're going to have a great episode. I can feel it. I can feel it in my bones today that we're going to have a great episode. And not just because of what we're going. What was that?
You can feel it in your bone claws.
I can feel my bone claws. My bone claws.
Ew. Disgusting. Get me out of here.
Don't take my word for it, though. Speak with my co-host, Alan Muir. Alan, are you feeling it in your bone claws?
I'm feeling it, but because I got hit by the Omega beams.
The Omega sanction.
Yeah. But on a side note, I'm watching an old baseball game from like 16 years ago, 2004.
Don't spoil it for me.
I won't. The Radio Shack had something to do with it, and then it reminded me of how I had to explain to my niece, who was born 9 years ago, what Radio Shack was, and now I feel, and that brought back the feeling I had when I had to explain it to her, of feeling redundant.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've even thought of a Radio Shack.
Graydon, you remember?
What?
You remember Radio Shack, right?
Oh, of course. I actually vividly remember Radio Shack. Like, I can picture it, where it was in my town, where things were, like a lot of RC cars. Yeah, it was pretty badass.
So, I'm a little confused. Usually, Alan, it's just me and you on this podcast, but today we actually have a guest who might be more knowledgeable in comics than either of us.
What?
Graydon Webb.
How the hell am I more knowledgeable?
I just wanted to put you on the spot. I wanted to...
Oh, God, no. I know nothing.
See how you'd react.
Hit us with your deep knowledge.
This is going to be a great episode. I'm really feeling it in my mother box.
There we go. There we go.
All right. Well, proud already.
So, today's podcast, if you haven't been able to tell based on the actual episode title, we'll be discussing what is considered possibly one of the best Batman stories of all time, but in my opinion, is probably one of the best origin stories of all time. We'll be discussing Batman Year One, written by Frank Miller, way back when. So,
and art by David Mazzucchelli.
Yes, amazing art. And he has such a way of drawing those characters and Gotham in particular to really give it the feel that I think everyone, like when you say Gotham, what people think Gotham is like.
Yeah. And man, this story still feels relevant, or Gotham City in this story feels relevant towards how things are today.
Yeah, and we'll get to a lot of that when we start discussing the story, but it's amazing how well this holds up. And, this was, written, what was it, almost 40 years ago, and it's still so on point with so much today.
Yeah, and it's hard to think that the story has aged well. The writer, not so much.
Yeah, that's kind of an understatement.
But we're not going to break into a tangent on Frank Miller.
No, we will not. That will be for another podcast if we decide to do that. So before we actually get into the story, what are your impressions of it between the two of you?
Graydon, you're our guest. So
this was one of my first, I guess, real forays into like superhero comics. I'm an Image comic guy. I'm more of a Walking Dead reader, and the closest I've ever really gotten is the occasional like Spider-Man or like Fantastic Four things I've dabbled in. but I've never really sat and read a Batman comic.
Have you
And
read Super Dinosaur?
no, I have not.
I highly recommend it.
Really? Okay, I will get around to
It's
it.
good Kirkman.
Yeah, I have the Invincible first volume out of the library again, and I'm trying to like actually read it all the way through for the first time. So I'm hoping to get to that. However, yeah, with year one, I just kind of went out on a limb and got it because it was like super cheap on Amazon recently, um, and I just read the whole thing like in one sitting and really enjoyed it. I've just known for years that it's been like heralded as this one of the greatest Batman stories of all time. I was actually surprised to see that it was actually originally published like as just basic Batman issues. Am I correct on that? Like it wasn't like a one-off thing. It was like a mini series.
Right. So originally, when the whole idea came up, it was supposed to be more of a kind of a graphic novel approach to it. And then Denny O'Neil at the time was trying to like kickstart the Batman comics and thought being able to serialize that as set like individual issues within the series itself would be a way to kind of boost sales, which it absolutely did. But yeah, the original intention was to do more of like a Dark Knight Rises type of non-continuity type approach.
So like knowing nothing, and I'm not trying to like I don't know where you're gonna take this and if it's spoiling what's coming up, but like what exact came after this? Like did it go back to like did it continue this story at the end of it, or did it go back to just Batman as we knew it?
If I remember right, I think right after these stories, um, it basically kicked off kind of like a year two approach, if I remember right, where they did like jumped a year ahead into like not too far past the story, but they never like did a full blown follow up like right after these events type thing.
Okay, because it has a good ending that's like a cliffhanger, but also like we know what happens, so it just kind of
Yeah.
throws you right into it. And so I can see that that's a good approach. But yeah, I definitely feel coming away from this that it's a good introduction to getting into that. I've actually wanted to read Batman pretty much all my life. Like my big things I want to get to someday are all of Spider-Man and all of Batman. I would love to do that. But but yeah, this was really cool and a really neat story that just summed up the things that I know about Batman. Like, and we'll get to that eventually of like where it kind of bled into other things and why I would kind of this story would feel familiar to me. Um, but it was it was really cool and I enjoyed it a lot.
Good. And Alan, how about you? I don't know when you first read the series or anything, but
I first read this. If you remember, me mentioning buying $500 worth of
yes,
trades and comics, other stuff.
Jesus.
Year one was was included in that giant sale, and I loved it. It got to a point where I then ordered year two, which I didn't like so much.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Was year two the one with the Reaper?
Yeah.
Yeah, I never read that one, but that was partially because I don't think it was really well received. I think at one point they actually kind of wrote it out continuity too.
Yeah, Zero Hour wrote
Yeah.
it. Zero Hour actually took out the year one as well, and but we won't speak about Zero Hour until we do the episode on Zero Hour.
Yeah.
And I also said I read it back in 2010, 2011. Then when Batman Arkham Origins released, I decided to reread it again because that game is basically a take is pretty much set during year one.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's when people talk about the best Batman stories, they bring up No Man's Land, Hush, the Jeff Loeb, Tim Sale, the multiple books or stories they've told.
Mm-hmm.
Year one, you can tell that Year One had a big influence on comics afterwards because there were so many books from DC that either after this, yeah, actually more after, like there was Green Arrow Year One. There were recently there was the Flash Year One, Wonder Woman Year One. It's a book. It's the book became so influential that other people wanted to do their take on like their Year One esque story on a certain character. So
Yeah, we'll see if that bleed into stuff like movies too later on. Some flat out blatant scenes kind of ripped straight from the comic in some ways. Yeah, that will be saved for the end of the episode. Myself, I don't even remember when I picked this book up. I think prior to it, I had read The Dark Knight Returns, and then I did the stupid thing in reading The Dark Knight Strikes Back, and I think that kind of soured me on Frank Miller for a while. So I didn't actually have any urge to read Year One. But of course, once I did, all that was kind of put aside. It's a fantastic story, and
have you
I would
read
say,
Superman Year One?
do what?
Did you ever get a chance to read Superman Year One?
Which Year One? Like the Earth one or the like Man of Steel burn?
The Frank Miller Year One.
Oh, the one that was written not too long ago? No, that one I have not read.
It is definitely something that Frank Miller would do. And I'm saying that, but I'm not saying that negatively. I'm not saying positively. It's one of those things where you read it and it's like, what is going on here? What is wrong with this guy?
Yeah, I can't say I've ever really liked his take on Superman.
Well, it's a different. His take on Superman and Superman Year One isn't the way it is in Dark Knight Returns.
Okay.
Like his Superman in Dark Knight Returns is he's characterizing him as like from Batman's point of view, not Frank Miller's point of view.
Yeah.
So
let's go ahead and talk about kind of how all this came to be. So when this all started out, Frank Miller was originally writing a series that many probably recognize in Daredevil. It was a very troubled run on Daredevil, but it eventually became pretty successful. So much so that DC decided to reach out to him to kind of help clean up the Batman side of DC after Crisis on Infinite Earths. His history was basically a mess at that point, including something as simple as where did the Batman idea come from? Was it because Thomas Wayne was dressed as, a Bat character at a masquerade ball, or because one flew through the window one night, something like that. So they were trying to, with Crisis on Infinite Earths, they were trying to clean everything up and give everybody a fresh start. And so they tapped on Frank Miller to do just that for Batman. Prior to that, the Batman books were doing very poorly sales-wise. I think a lot of people were starting to get kind of tired of the more, I don't even remember if they were so much campy, but they were definitely not as dark as they would become during the 80s because of, Frank Miller in particularly. It got to the point where either the Batman books or the Detective Comics books were actually planned on being canceled. And so Dennis O'Neil, who I think had just started up in a new position at DC at the time, saw how well Frank Miller was doing with Daredevil. And so knowing that Frank Miller was coming over to DC to, write Batman specifically with Dark Knight Returns, he wanted to try and have him do something for the mainline books as well. And part of the contract that DC originally had with Frank Miller was to do not only The Dark Knight Returns, but also to do like a separate book as well. If I remember, it was supposed to be an origin story. As we noted before, it was supposed to be more of a like one collected release versus a monthly book. And so, out of that came Batman Year One. As opposed to The Dark Knight Returns, Frank Miller was very concerned about writing and illustrating a book because of how stressful it was to do that at one time. So that is where he got some help in David Mazzucchelli as the artist, which was probably for the best because I prefer David's art over Frank's any day of the week. And then when writing the book, that is partly where Frank was a little concerned at, because when he was starting to do it, he did not want to get tied up in all the continuity that came beforehand. I don't think he realized the end goal of Crisis was to give everything a fresh start. So in his mind, when he was originally tasked with this, the one collection could have been an out of continuity book that he didn't really have to worry about anything before. And when Denny approached him to do the monthly books, he thought that also meant he had to change his, change the idea of how he was going to write that into, oh no, okay, so now I got to factor in something that happened in the 70s. And then I got to factor in this thing that happened in the 60s. And all of that. He had to try and work everything backwards. And Denny basically went to him and was like, no, this is start fresh. Everything you do here, we will branch from that. So take whatever you want, write the story you want, and we will go from there. And that's exactly what he did. So when he was writing the book, he wanted to stick with the original Bob Kane and Bill Finger version. He didn't want to change it up too drastically, so he approached it by fleshing out the lesser parts of the origin, stuff that wasn't really focused on when he was originally written. And he also wanted to do something with Batman, which often wasn't shown and kind of to this day still isn't shown very well. He wanted to show a Batman that failed. He didn't want this Batman that had a plan for everything. He wanted to show Batman failing several times before he became the Batman. And he just found that as a more interesting approach, and I think it worked pretty well in the story.
It worked for The Last Jedi.
It worked for Last Jedi. Sure, I've not seen that, so I will. I will take.
In all seriousness, this is a similar type of thing that Grant Morrison did when he took over Action Comics for the New 52, and something that Bendis, or where Grant, when he did his run on Action Comics, people liked it. When Bendis, though, which is more recent, people didn't and still don't like it. I'm pretty sure they still hate Bendis.
I didn't realize Bendis wrote a Superman story, like an origin story at least.
Yeah, after the Tomasi Patrick Gleason book, he took over Action and the Superman title.
Mm-hmm.
Then did a Man of Steel, just like Byrne did. And it's just, as we're recording this, DC fandom is happening, and in about 2 weeks or a couple weeks, they're going to be doing part 2 and Mark Waid is scheduled to be there, and I'm pretty sure that they're going to announce that he's taking over Superman.
I would love that. Birthright was amazing. Like, that dude knows how to write a Superman book.
Yeah, and I don't remember whether it was a podcast or something I was experiencing, but Mark Waid was talking about how a lot of people out there don't know how to write Superman.
I would agree with that.
And if they can get Mark Waid back, anything's possible. I
would agree.
So,
and with that, let us get into the story of Batman Year One. All right, so I will start out with the first issue, Chapter 1. I don't know in the collected versions you guys might have, but at least for me, it was said chapter 1 was who I am, how I came to be.
They were
And
separated into 3 little parts. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. And so the story begins with kind of a split view with James Gordon and Bruce Wayne both arriving in Gotham. Both are seeing Gotham as it is, which is like a crime-ridden city with too much fixing for one man. Both are seeing past the appearance of a normal city and knows that there's something darker within it. Bruce is flying in and Gordon is riding a train, and they're both seeing it from 2 different angles and coming to the same conclusion. But Gordon, when he gets off, he gets to meet Lieutenant Flass, who will eventually take him to Commissioner Loeb. And it's there that Gordon reassures Loeb that whatever mistakes he made in the past, he's willing to prove himself as an officer with his work ethic and honesty. As we find out later that apparently he does not take well to cops who, don't take their job too seriously. And Flass finds that out pretty soon too. And so with his first time out with Flass, he already introduces him to the city as expected. Flass immediately picks a fight with someone on the street, and Gordon just sits and takes notes. He learned from his previous mistakes. He was going to make sure he knew everything before he brought another cop down, and so he just watches everything Flass does, including how Flass moves. So when time comes, he'll know exactly what he needs to do. And so after that, there's a little bit of a time skip, and this entire story has several time skips throughout it. So we see Gordon as a lieutenant being warned by Flass that the other boys think he's too rough on them. And he kind of hints that he should be more careful, especially with his wife, Barbara, being pregnant. Then there's another jump ahead, and this time we see Bruce training. And during this training, he finds out that he's not quite ready to take to the streets yet. And this, as I continue reading this book, I realize that as much as this is called Batman Year One, it almost feels more of a Commissioner Gordon story, which isn't necessarily a knock against it. It's probably my favorite Commissioner Gordon story.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was just kind of a weird take to see how much focus Gordon gets over Bruce and Batman. And so here we get another time jump, and we see Flass complaining to Commissioner Loeb that Gordon isn't fitting in with the rest of the corrupt team, and that he's taking it seriously, whereas they don't. So they arrange something to be done about Gordon while Commissioner Loeb is out of town for a conference, so he doesn't come back down on him while he is in town. Again, another time jump. I might just stop referencing the time jumps just because there's so damn many of them. We see Bruce getting ready for a night on the town by putting on some prosthetics, including like a scar on his cheek. Then we see Gordon going to his car. Even though he requested a night off, he was never given an answer. And now we see why. As he goes to his car, a few men wielding bats come out of the shadows and attack him. He fights back valiantly, but it's been a while since his military days, and he's blindsided. And they warn him again using Barbara. And though he can't see anybody in particular, Lieutenant Flass has a very familiar chuckle that Gordon is able to take note of. And then it cuts to Bruce, who is walking the streets where a hooker named Holly tries to catch his attention. And after Holly fails, she's reprimanded by her pimp, who Bruce provokes to attack him. Bruce kind of easily dispatches him, only to be attacked by the other, stabbed in the leg by Holly. Selena watches everything and sees Bruce grab Holly's wrist and seemingly hurt her. And Selena does not take that lightly. So she ends up leaping down and tries to fight him. And as the police arrive, they end up shooting Bruce in the shoulder for basically no reason. And instead of taking him to a doctor, decide to instead book him. And it's kind of a good point of seeing how corrupt the cops are at this point, that they don't really care what happens to the citizens there. But, Bruce, as they head back to the precinct, Bruce hears one of the cops say that they don't care if drifters like him die, and Bruce ends up busting out and causes the car to wreck in a fiery mess. But Bruce, having the morals he does, is saves them from dying. And Bruce is pretty badly hurt at this point and finds his car, considers the night a failure, and drives home. And then during the next scene, we see Gordon with a bat in his car looking for Flass. This is probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire book. He catches him playing poker at a friend's house and waits for him to leave. And when he does, he follows him and then gets Flass to wreck his car. They each kind of get out, and Flass recognizes Gordon, and it's clear that things are going to go down. Gordon tosses him a bat as a handicap and then proceeds to beat the living piss out of Flass. He is careful. He is very careful, though. Not enough to take him to a hospital, just enough to incapacitate him and hurt his pride. He then strips Flass of all of his clothes, handcuffs him, and drives off. And he knows Flass will know better than to mess with Gordon or threaten his wife again. And then here's kind of the creation of Batman as we see Bruce sitting in a chair in his mansion after we see the car crashed outside. He debates whether he is strong enough to continue or if he should allow himself to bleed out. He reminisces about the fateful night where his parents died outside the showing of Zorro. And it's at that point a bat busts in through the window and sits atop a bust that's in front of him. And that's when the idea is sparked that he will become a bat. And then the little bell that will call Alfred to come and save him, he gives it a ring. And that is where the issue ends. So how did you guys like that first issue?
I really enjoyed I enjoyed everything with Gordon, like Flass saying to Commissioner Loeb, me and a few of the boys can just like beat him, and Loeb says or berates him for like wanting to bring more heat down on him because Loeb is just as corrupt or even more corrupt than all the cops in Gotham.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just something they translate that they added into the Batman Year One adaptation, sort of, where Flass and some other cops with masks on beat him down with bats, and just knowing that Flass started this whole thing himself, and if I remember correctly, there was a Flass appeared on Gotham, the worst Batman,
really?
the worst Batman series of all time, and didn't get him and Gordon didn't get to have the epic fight I was hoping for, like Duel of the Fates but with bats. But overall, like the whole a failure being a great teacher is something. It's one of those things where like it feels like when Jeff Johns brought in the other spectrums to the Green Lantern Corps. Like, why hasn't anyone done a story with something like this? Like, it was so simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's great. Like, part of the reason I like this book so much is that Loeb, who's like just a despicable human being, Mazzucchelli, I think, draws him amazingly. Like, he just looks like a disgusting piece of trash, and I love it so much. What about you, Graydon? How'd you like this first issue?
I think it was extremely well done in telling, the opening of it is really neat in how it's like they're reflecting views, and then just setting up, like you said, setting up the Gotham that we've known for years, and just making it seem like picture perfect to what we know. And then just the way that it I kind of like how this story follows Gordon more, because it just sets up it takes a step back from just Batman being Batman and focuses more on the corruption of the system, and then you kind of get it So then you can ultimately go back to Batman and be like, oh, I get why he fights for what he does. Like this whole town is a shithole, and I know now because of this series here. And so I think that, like, yeah, with the way that like Flash is portrayed, and the commissioner is just the worst man. And then like in the later ones where they bring Falcone in, like it brings all these like these sleazeballs into the Gotham canon, and makes it feel a lot dirtier and awful. And then just to mention briefly the film itself, which I watched after I read it, but the way that they deal with that scene with the bat smashing through the window is just beautifully done. Like the whole way, like it flies in through the window, and as the glass falls, like Bruce looks up and sees the bat like reflected in the glass shards, and like it's just like so prophetic as to what he's gonna become. And that made it seem like it's so cool how you can take, I don't know, 5 pages in the book that personally I was just kind of like, oh, that, like, I get what's going on here, but it's not really that super impactful when he was kind of bleeding out and like calling to his dad. But in the film, it's just like, wow, this is like art, and this is artsy and really well done. And it just kind of leaves you. It made that cliffhanger of the first issue like make it more worth it. And I think that, yeah, that whole first issue is like really good at setting up the world for what comes after.
Speaking of Gotham and the Batman Year One animated adaptation, the actor who played or who voiced Batman ended up portraying Gordon, Ben McKenzie.
Oh,
was that
really?
him?
Yeah, also famously known for the OC.
Yep.
Well, side note, I thought that the Bruce performance in the film was just absolutely terrible. It was like the worst part.
A lot of people.
Oh my god, he's awful.
You're not alone in that.
Okay, good.
Like Cranston stole that movie by a country mile.
Absolutely. I didn't even know. Weird thing, and you'll hate me for this, but I didn't realize it was Bryan Cranston. I knew that voice, and I was like, at one point, I was in the middle of it, and I had to like watch it sporadically throughout the day, and I was like, I gotta look up who that is, and I never did until the very end, and then I was like, holy shit, yes.
Oh, and this baseball game I'm watching from 2004, periodically they're showing Catwoman ads.
Oh no.
Oh God.
Yeah, God.
I wonder what Catwoman took from Year One. Probably nothing.
I've never watched that movie. I have no urge to.
You didn't do it as research? What the hell?
Not until we get to that movie, which maybe if we get desperate enough, I might go back. Catwoman and Steel and all that trash.
Ugh.
All right, so Chapter 2, War is Declared. Would one of you like to summarize this, or would you like me to?
Go for it.
Okay. All right, so with this issue, we see Gordon driving around as he hears about this paranoid schizophrenic kidnapping children at gunpoint. It's not until he hears a certain officer is en route named Brandon and knows things will go from bad to worse. He doesn't wait and gets to the scene as quickly as possible to prevent Brandon from being involved. Gordon does take it into his own hands, and he shows the kidnapper his gun before dropping it to the ground and going inside. And he remarks as he's going up the stairs that he hopes Barbara isn't watching, before it cuts to, the next panel with her watching it. And then it goes back to him. And he's like, I'm aware she's watching it. And then he meets the man at the door, trying to be as calm as possible, and quickly knocks him out and saving the day, basically. The next scene is the following day where Brandon is remarking to Commissioner Loeb that Gordon humiliated him in front of his men. But for the time being, Loeb's hands are tied because the press likes Gordon. And then we see Gordon practicing his aim, and he remarks how much he just hates his job. The next few days, Gordon is tired. He is kind of reflecting on the world around him, specifically in Gotham, and he's growing fearful about bringing a child into the world. And then a few days later, he gets a call from a man named Merkel, who is telling him that there's a giant bat running around. And so the next scene, we actually see this giant bat. Batman is on the scene. Some men are trying to rob an apartment on a fire escape, and Batman butts in. He practices some of the stuff here, including a growl and the use of the costume itself. However, when he lands, not only does it scare a few of them, but one ends up falling backwards off the escape. And that is when Batman panics because he knows the kid will die if he falls off, and quickly grabs him, leaving himself open for a hit, which the other people try to take advantage of.
Oh yeah, he gets kicked in the face.
Yep.
TV, he gets TV hit. He gets hit with the TV on in the head, and man,
Yeah, he's able to win, but he definitely
how he didn't get a CT from that? I'm stumped.
I mean, it's possible he did, which would explain a lot later on in his life, but
Yeah, it would explain the funnier or the college humor Batman skits.
I love those skits so much. And so we get a time skip a month later, and Gordon is giving a briefing on the Batman to all of his men. And this is where we first see Detective Essen for the first time, helping Gordon light his match as Flash.
Can we just? I just love the way Flash looks.
He's like neck brace and in a wheelchair and all this.
Man, the only thing he was missing was a what's the name of those hats? Where it has a thing that a rotating, basically a dunce hat.
Like one of those propeller hats or whatever.
Yeah. Because you the first part, chapter 1, he's like this arrogant, big, just terrible person. Then he goes to this where he knows his place.
Mm-hmm.
Now that Gordon, hero of Gotham, is there.
Yeah, it's just so good. Yeah, in that first issue, he comes off as this man's man, this Green Beret who could take on anything. And then this one, he's kind of more this cowardly, looking to Gordon for approval on everything type approach. And this is kind of where you see that because, Gordon goes, tells Flash to give him the story that on Batman that Flash, went through. But Gordon has a specific request to not exaggerate when telling the story. And so Flash does just that, describing a moment where Batman flew down from the sky and someone fired at him and it went right through him. And nobody is taking Flash seriously, which is just embarrassing the hell out of Flash this entire time.
Yeah, he's saying that he's not. First he says he's not human.
Yeah.
Which okay, you clearly have PTSD from the PTSD plus humiliation from what Gordon did.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because the way he starts his story, and he's trying to be like, yeah, I don't have the book in front of me, but he was talking about how he was, putting a stop to all this case, and he was doing it single-handedly or whatever, and then he has to stop and gauge the room to see if everyone's taking him seriously or not.
Yeah, they mentioned, I think it was either this chapter or the first chapter where they mentioned he went from doing from attacking pushers, or no, attacking pimps. Then he escalated further. Then he escalated even more. It's he went from pimps to pushers to the heads of the pushers.
Mm-hmm. And so a few days later, we see Loeb eating with some of his more powerful friends, such as Falcone. And that is when we see Batman kind of prepping outside. It's kind of funny to see Batman's whole approach as to how he's going to make an entrance, with like a floodlight, and he has the C4 and all this stuff. And as he's listening to Loeb, he hears the name Gordon, and he kind of makes a mental note that all the right people seem to hate him. And as the people continue to talk about Gordon, they mention that Batman and Harvey Dent are also bad for their business. And that is when Batman cuts the lights and makes his big dramatic entrance by blowing a hole in the wall. And I also love this scene. And it's kind of, I'll just read the text. It says, "You've eaten Gotham's wealth, its spirit. Your feast is nearly over. From this moment on, none of you are safe." And then he just not quickly, he extinguishes like the last light in the room as it just goes completely dark. And I just love the whole mood of that entire scene.
Well,
It's
for me, I read it in the Kevin Conroy, as I do with anything Batman related, and it came off more eloquent.
If I could do a Conroy voice, I would have, but Bale's is much easier to kind of mimic.
Yeah, I mean, you went from Bale, and you were sort of very close to approaching Rorschach territory. I mean, those two aren't the same. Are those pretty much the same?
they are one and the same.
Were you gonna say something there, Graydon?
No, it's just like the fact that like that scene with the dinner party, it like something that I don't know. I've lost my train of thought. Of course, I like the portrayal of Batman here because it seems like throughout the story he's kind of fighting with how he wants to perceive himself. Like,
Yeah.
we know Batman as like it's obvious he's going to put on a disguise and be different than just, "Hi, I'm Bruce Wayne in a suit." But like with like the fight when he fights the kids on the railing, it's just really reckless. And then when he goes into this into the dinner party, it's like kind of methodical, but also like just nightmarish. Like he just shows up and like I've tried to figure that out both while reading it and watching it. I was like, does he hurt anybody, or does he just show up? Like, is that just it? And then he walks out. Like it just fades to black, and that's kind of it. And no one's really injured the next day. And it's just kind of like, okay, you didn't really do anything. But then there's like a moment later on where he's like, he fights somebody, and I think the third one, and he's like, he shares his fear with him.
Yeah.
And it's just like, Jesus, you have evolved. Like in a small amount of time with these 3 different issues, he's like three different Batmen. And so in this middle ground here, it's just like this weird, it kind of changes the tone a lot because he's now kind of figuring out more of like he's going to use his power to make a change, but he doesn't totally know what he wants to do with that yet. And he didn't have to use any gadgets or any real theatrics. He just did his thing. And I thought that was a really neat scene.
There seems to be like a lot of yeah, it seems like there's a lot of experimenting on his part through these first few issues as he's trying to figure out exactly what he wants this Batman character to be. But yeah,
it's fun to watch.
And so from there, obviously, Loeb's gonna retaliate, and so he threatens Gordon with losing his job if he can't bring in the Batman. They try to, I get a kick out of this. They try to lure Batman into showing himself by setting all these traps around the city to make it look like crimes are being committed. But it's all officers putting on an act, and then you see Batman like in the shadows, and he's pointing out like, oh, I can't think of any other officer's name. Like, oh, there's Merkel, there's Brandon. He's pointing out all these cops. He's seeing right through everything. I got a good kick out of it.
Yeah, he mentioned like I wasn't sure with like the word balloons or with the monologue. Essen, I think it's Batman who mentions, either Gordon or Batman mentions that Essen knows how to run on like while wearing heels,
Mm-hmm.
and not many people know how to do that properly.
Yep.
And it's just one of those things where, like, yeah, that you're seeing the detective and him start to be born.
All right, and then from there, Batman decides to meet up with Falcone. It's kind of off panel, but we do see someone come into Falcone's room, and Falcone's tied up, who basically mentions that Batman took his Rolls Royce over to a pier and dumped it in the water, and that's kind of the breaking point for Falcone and wanting Batman dead. Then the next day, you see Gordon talking with Harvey Dent, and Gordon's trying to piece together who Batman is at this point, and he's starting to suspect Dent because of his ethics and how good of a shape that Dent is always in. And Dent is able to provide different alibis for all these dates that Gordon inquires about. And then as he leaves, we see Batman hidden behind Dent's desk as Dent kind of leans over and tells him it's safe to come out. And then as Gordon and Essen leave, they go back over Dent's likelihood as Batman. And while some of the ideas do work out, the problem is basically the money and how everything that the Batman is capable of doing, how Dent wouldn't be able to afford all of that. And Essen basically breaks it open. Essen proposes the idea that Batman is Bruce Wayne, this man with a troubled past, this man who clearly has no trouble with money. And this is where Gordon also seems to start getting an interest in Essen beyond a professional sense. And then suddenly a truck runs a red light as Gordon is about to pass, and Batman is kind of keeping tabs overhead. Whatever the problem is, whether it's a heart attack or the gas pedal is stuck, the driver is clearly out of control. Gordon is able to pull up next to it and gets the driver out as Batman leaps in to save a homeless woman who would have been hit by the truck. And as Gordon comes to after the brief crash, he sees Essen holding Batman up. But Essen turns her head to check on Gordon, which is enough of a distraction for Batman to kind of clock Essen in the head and start running off. Gordon directs other officers to follow him, and some of the officers fire off some shots, which hits Batman in the leg. Batman is able to get himself into a building that Gordon quickly gets surrounded, but Loeb is able to direct Brandon to get involved, despite Gordon not wanting that to happen. And then the issue kind of ends with the building being set for demolition and Commissioner Loeb giving the okay to drop something on top of the building that leads to a small explosion and lights the building on fire in hopes to take out the Batman. And that is the end of issue 2.
Yeah, one of the things I forgot to mention was Loeb mentioning that Batman being, like, he regards Batman as a Robin Hood wannabe.
Yeah.
Just saying what everyone was thinking. And when it comes to the stuff with Harvey, I completely forgot about that when I watched Dark Knight.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised because it's clear that Batman and Harvey have a relationship in this book, but all of it seems to be done off panel. Do either of you like that, or would you like to have seen that kind of more fleshed out in a story?
Well, technically they did in the Batman Telltale series.
I was just going to mention that. I absolutely loved the dynamic between the two of them in the Telltale series. And it was just a really good, like, Two-Face origin, that whole game. So I think that's it's fun to see the two of them interact like that, but it is a little disorienting for someone like me who didn't totally know why they had this, like, behind the scenes friendship. Like, it seemed, I don't want to say forced, but, like, why exactly did Dent have to be in this at all? But then it was just like, oh, and then he's housing Batman, but we don't know why, and then it never comes into play again. Really.
Yeah.
And it just seems like this weird, it's probably the most, like, just unnecessary thing in an out of place thing in this whole year one thing.
Part of me wonders if that was meant to be expanded on in like the original story, where it was supposed to be just that one collection, and because the single issues are more narrow in scope, I just wonder if a lot of that had to be cut out because, I mean, yeah, a lot of it just feels like it was kind of shoehorned in there just to have another character that other people can be like, wink, wink, that's going to be Two-Face.
Yeah.
But
and it's like, that's the kind of thing with Batman, especially, this happens in a lot of different things where it's like, oh, it's him. Like, as soon as I saw Selina, I was like, of course, here she is. She's going to have an origin. And it's just like, I don't know. There's no real simple way to do that with Batman, especially, or really Spider-Man too, because a lot of people like a lot of those characters, and it's just like, oh, this guy, yep, he's gonna be this dude, and and so it just felt like, well, why Two-Face gotta be in this?
yeah, like
At
Selena.
least-
Sorry, go ahead, Alan.
Like they put these characters that are fan favorites in, but they at least didn't go to like that extra mile to like I'm just gonna call it the Phantom Menace effect, where it's like Anakin Skywalker meet Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Anakin shows off his droid, the droid he built, C-3PO, or R2D2 getting a medal from the Queen of Naboo.
Oh, that they weren't like blatant about it. It was just more of a side thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Batman walking the halls of Arkham Asylum and being like, "Who's this guy? It's the Joker."
Yeah, it's like, oh,
Well-
that's the one that we call the Joker.
I mean, that's sort of what happens in the Telltale game.
With the Joker?
Yeah.
Yeah, he kind of just does come in, but more so though. I feel like it happens often with Harley Quinn in a lot of things, because it'll just be like, oh, that I actually remember when she came into Gotham, because my dad showed me, because he was all excited about it because he fell for what I hate, and they were just like, oh, look at that, Harleen Quinzel. Oh boy, I can't wait to see what she does. And it's just like, oh. Well, that's literally just a door to the Joker, and she's just gonna be that, and you know that now.
Graydon, have you ever seen Batman the Animated Series?
Very sparingly.
Okay, watch the episode Mad Love.
Is that the one with her introduction?
No, it's one of the more it's one of the best episodes of the entire series. It's the ultimate explanation of why, like her relationship with Joker, and why people who've seen Suicide Squad or other stuff say, like, the Harley Quinn looking for her Mr. J or something.
Yeah.
And like, I won't spoil it, but there was a shark.
Okay. I will look into that. Is that on is the animated series on DC Universe?
DC Universe? Yeah.
Okay. Then I will do my best to get around to that, because I've been wanting to for a while.
Be sure to do it soon, because who knows how long DC Universe is going to be around.
Well, I have the HBO Max now, so I'm watching it through that, and most likely that will stay a part of that.
Okay, so let us get into Chapter 3. This one was titled Black Dawn, and we see Batman finding shelter from the blast in a metal trapdoor in the floor after abandoning his utility belt since thermite caught on fire. Holly is able to see the explosions from a distance and wakes Selina up to look at it, and Brandon arrives on the scene directing his SWAT team into the building with a no prisoners mentality. It's just kind of haphazard panels everywhere about all these different people, as all this starts going down between the police and Batman. Holly wants to go down to the scene and Selina agrees, so they go down and you'll see them later on in the crowd. And so as Brandon's men scour the building, they run across a chimney and a nearby trap door, and they decide to go down there. The two men standing guard by the chimney are quickly knocked out by some pressure point hits from Batman popping out of the chimney. The trap doors shut with the men inside, and Batman puts a large beam on top to prevent anyone coming back out. And that's when they notice that the chimney is connected to the room above, but that it goes down up into where the trap room is, and Batman must have kicked it out and went up that way. But as they're sitting there looking at it, a little item drops down into the chimney, and they scramble to get their gas masks on. And outside, we see Gordon being heartbroken that Brandon is in need of help, just putting no effort into helping them whatsoever as they kind of put themselves in this situation. We see a helicopter flying around outside with snipers and Commissioner Loeb trying to catch Batman. And we see the sun starting to come up. And that's when Batman realizes that time is running out. He needs to get out of there now. So Batman has to reassess the situation as Brand's men comes downstairs where Batman is hiding. The only thing that he has on him now is a blowgun with 3 darts and a special invention courtesy of Wayne Electronics that has not been tested out before. And it's at this point he feels that there's no better time to test it since he might not make it out of here alive. And as he presses the button, we see bats stirring in a cave by Wayne Manor. And as Brandon's men looks around, Batman takes out one of them with a dart. But the other men kind of catch sight of this and start unloading at where he's laying at. He's able to wiggle away and saves a cat in the process, tossing it out the window, which then, of course, goes into the arms of Selina. But in doing so, he catches a bullet in the arm. The men close in on Batman. He kicks out a pillar, causing the roof to collapse around them. And with no more hiding, Batman basically gets in close and starts attacking the whole SWAT team. Then we see an outside shot where one of the men get knocked out through the wall with Gordon kind of staring on. And that's when he recognizes the crowd starting to cheer for Batman. Except the cheers are suddenly replaced by screams as bats block out the sun. And Batman uses this as his chance to escape as he steals a police cycle and uses them as a shroud so they can't find him in the helicopter. And then the next page or two is the fallout from that failure of a scene. It shows kids needing vaccinations from all the bats that showed up. Different members of the SWAT team were injured. Dead winos that were in the building. We see Gordon and Essen continuing to discuss Wayne as being Batman. And then we see Alfred covering up for him, saying he's been gone 6 weeks skiing in Switzerland. Alfred tries calling and... Gordon tries calling and speaks to someone claiming to be Wayne that is in Switzerland and injured. Sorry, I'm trying to fix my notes here as I misspeak on everything here. And Essen is probably the smartest person in this entire book. She mentions how Wayne can afford impersonators and hide bullet wounds with casts, and Gordon seems kind of out of it, but I don't know about you guys, it looks like he was kind of admiring Essen in this scene.
Yeah.
Which I think the way what they were trying to do was Essen was bending down to pick something up or whatever, but the way the frame was shot, it looked, I don't know, it just kind of looked off, and you can't quite tell what he was looking at. Anyways, we see Bruce going over everything and that he can't do this alone, and this is where he starts thinking that he needs Gordon's help. And then we start kind of seeing a flash of different scenes here. Selina is basically tired of her life there. She knocks out the pimp, and she takes Holly and leaves. Gordon and Essen share a smoke and drink at a diner, and they get a little bit closer, and they share a kiss. Selina tries out her new costume. Some would say she looks good as a cat. And then we see Gordon going over everything in his mind, kind of chilling in bed, and he hates the city. He hates the fights with his wife. He knows he's done bad, and he wants to apologize for not being there, but also for bringing a son into the world, and that he has feelings for Essen. And then he's also thinking of Batman and what he wants to do with Batman. He sees Batman as a criminal. Gordon is a cop. Should be simple. But Batman is doing the thing that cops should be doing, but in Gotham, everything is kind of turned around. The cops and the mayor are the true criminals, and Batman is the one saving people. And so all of this is kind of rumbling around in his head, and that is where the issue ends.
Yeah, the plant, like the seed being planted of Gordon having his doubts about Batman is like right during the part where Batman saves the homeless woman.
Mm-hmm.
And despite being a cop in a shithole, he wants to like be rid of the whole situation, but at the same time he wants to he knows that, or I'm inferring that he must know that there's a reason that he's doing it, or that Batman's like that he exists.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like, oftentimes in these kind of stories, it's, oh, you're the vigilante. I got to arrest you because vigilantes are bad and everything. And we see, like, Gordon actually kind of assessing that idea that, like, yeah, he's a vigilante, but he's doing what none of the cops are actually doing here. And so it actually, in Gordon's mind, he is able to rationalize the idea of a vigilante being used in a way that I don't feel is ever really thoroughly explained in most of these kind of stories. But I don't know. It's just, I like the idea of Gordon kind of discussing it all in his head and trying to clear out what to do with his, he takes an idea of being a cop seriously, and there are certain laws he wants to obey. And this is like one of those laws where he's like, technically I should be doing my job and stopping this dude, but it might be better for me to kind of look the other way and let him do what he's doing. And I also think kind of what we were discussing with the last one about like just characters kind of appearing. Selina, I feel like she's kind of in that point here too. There's like one scene you could kind of say she has a part in issue 4, but for the most part, I think you could take Selina out and everything would still fall into place pretty well.
Yeah, she kind of spends the majority of this story being I don't know, it doesn't really set up her origin story exactly in a way that I think could be well done and maybe was in another comic, but I feel like Selina just kind of takes a backseat in terms of trying to like push herself into the narrative. But ultimately you could just take her out completely, and in the film and stuff she seems a bit more interesting of a character, but really the her and Holly side story, especially while he's like arguably the climax of year 1, which I feel is this whole building burning scene. Selina does like nothing. So you could take her out of pretty much the entire thing and it would all be the same story.
Yeah.
I think that the reason Frank Miller put Selina in the story is because her and Bruce's connection to on Earth 2, where
how they would eventually get married and all that.
they'd be married, have Huntress, who was Robin on that Earth.
Yeah.
And ever since I'd go on more, but I think we could do a whole episode on DC's hesitance to actually have weddings happen. Like certain characters like Superman and Lois, Green Arrow and Black Canary, but there are certain ones like Kate Kane and Maggie Sawyer, and the big fake out with more recently with Batman issue 50, which I'm sure a lot of people were angry with that.
Yeah.
Because like they were building up to it.
What is this one? What happened there?
What'd you say?
What happened in issue 50? I didn't.
Okay,
I
so
don't recall.
Tom King wrote about 85 issues of Batman from 2016 to, I want to say, I think I think his run ended I think last year or beginning of this year, and he wanted to, or there was a plot where Bruce proposes to Selena, and
Oh,
she leaves him at the altar, I think, if I remember correctly.
she would.
And like there's a great issue where the Joker is trying to, like, where he's trying to process the whole thing, and I'm not sure if it's gonna be like if it's gonna be or happen with everything DC's going through right now. But Tom King, who wrote nearly 100 issues of Batman, it was announced that he was gonna be doing I think either 6 or 12 issue miniseries focusing on Bruce and Selena, to the point where they'd have a kid together.
Oh,
But then the news of a new Batman. But then again, they could, if the story ends up, or if the miniseries ends up happening, they could have Bruce retire for a bit, let this new Batman have his run. So, just my 2 cents.
I'd be interested to hear an episode on that kind of thing.
Well, we still need to get through this episode, so let's move to issue 4, the last issue. All right, so here we see Gordon and Essen's relationship continuing. He thinks he's in love, but she plans on leaving Gotham. We see Gordon apprehending narcotics dealer Jefferson Skeevers, but Skeevers is able to get set free with Harvey Dent being perfectly fine with it. This sets off Gordon, who kind of goes off on Dent, who seems unfazed by all of this, because it seems to be insinuated that he is working with Batman on this, because the next day we see Batman climbing up the wall outside of Skeever's room. And he busts in, he warns Skeevers, as Graydon, you mentioned earlier, you can never escape me, bullets don't harm me, nothing harms me, but I know pain. I know pain. Sometimes I share it with someone like you. Cut to black.
Terrifying. It's
Terrifying.
Really freaking scary. That's like some scarecrow bullshit, and he's Batman. We do see that there's a moment, I think, in Batman Begins that's kind of like that, isn't there? Where he's like, he has like the, like he gets really dark and like kind of does like a penance stare type thing.
Is that like after the scarecrow the scarecrow gas has all been went out, and they kind of give him that like scary monster bat creature
That might
thing?
be what I'm thinking of. I didn't even make the connection that Scarecrow was in Batman Begins. I totally forgot about that. I've blocked that movie from my memory. But
why? It's so good.
I never liked Batman Begins. Never, ever. All I remember about that movie is Liam Neeson being horribly disappointing and a train crashing into like a parking garage. That happens, right? Like a train goes off the rails and like breaks. Yeah, okay. So yes, that's it.
I mean,
but
Scarecrow he's in the whole trilogy. So
yeah, but it's like crazy because I really don't like Batman Begins, and Dark Knight then is on the opposite spectrum, one of my favorite movies of all time. So it's just like it's very my love of Nolan's Batman is weird. But yeah, it's just in year one, it's like this crazy moment that is again totally different than the last Batman we saw in the last issue, and it's just he's scary and brutal, and this moment is just frightening.
And they illustrate that pretty well in the book. Next day, Skeevers, I mean, he's dressing to hide like who he really is, but like Batman does the job and basically scares Skeevers to go speak with Gordon to make a plea deal with Dent. He's going to basically break everything down on Flass, leaving him implicated on a drug operation, which this brings Gordon to Commissioner Loeb, where Brandon is sitting in too. And Loeb basically tells Gordon that he isn't liking how it's done, and he's going to expect some change. Otherwise, things will start leaking out. And by leaking out, he kind of gives Gordon this picture of him kissing Essen. And was it Brandon says something about like the walls having eyes or something? And it's just the two of them feeling like they finally got the upper hand on Gordon, who proves them wrong here shortly. So yeah, we see another time jump. Gordon and his wife, Barbara, are meeting Bruce at his mansion to go over the potential of him being Batman. And here is one of those infamous scenes of Bruce putting on one hell of a show, including a very attractive woman. As they leave, Gordon messes up about his relationship with Essen to his wife, Barbara. You don't really see that on panel. You see him kind of bring it up before it cuts back to Bruce, who's kind of watching them, wondering why they aren't leaving. And then they finally do.
I think that's well done. Like,
Yeah.
I actually like just watched that scene in the movie right before we recorded because I was finishing it up, and like I remembered those panels, and like I think it's nice that they let him kind of have his time because like it's kind of Gordon's story in a way, as we keep saying, and it's like it's nice that they don't have to delve into this big thing, like what goes on, and I think that it's handled really well with and in a little bit later when they call up Barbara, but you'll mention that, but it's just like you see the resolution, you get it, and I think that it's nice that like I think that was just well done to go back to Bruce like that.
Mhm.
Again, it's artistic.
Yeah, I mean, they could have spent like 3 or 4 pages of, them yelling at each other about, why all this was happening, but it was unnecessary. Like,
well, I feel like in a way you could do that and probably would do that more nowadays. Like I liken it to like, say like a Walking Dead type thing. You would have pages and pages of like discussion, like this big thing, and it's like it's a pretty big event to have them talk about this big thing that's affecting them, but like you didn't need to here, and I feel like Year One does that very well in that, especially with the time jumps. It's a lot of 2 panels, information next, and it's just those jumping between, like there's no filler. There is no filler in Year One with the exception of like some of the Selena stuff. It's just like everything is just like to the next, and it all flows so well, and that's what I really like, especially in hindsight, looking back on it, because I've always been trying to hold above all of this, like, why is this so beloved? Why is this said it's the greatest, one of the greatest Batman stories? And like I can really see, like, it's so especially when you consider it as just being a couple issues of the basic Batman comic, and then you're given these 3 and they just cut to the chase and tell a story, and it's just really well done, and I like that about it a lot, is that there's no bullshit with this one. It's just story.
Yeah, I mean, even with like, they are able to tell a complete story, like doing this as well. Whereas I feel like a lot of writers are like, well, show this scene playing out in its entirety, like it's going to, diminish the book in some way. But like, say what you want about Frank Miller, like he keeps this on the rails very well. The train never stops. It's, it's just so well written in a way that you don't need to have all those details to still piece everything together. And I think that's part of the reason it's still like a beloved story today, because it's just so well written.
And even like the part where they do focus a bit, they have a couple panels of like the origin, like there you see the murder go on of his parents, but it's so fast that you don't even we don't need to see all of it. We don't need to dwell on it. Like it's there, and now we're back to the present, and it's just really well done.
Mm-hmm. Even still, you got like this was back, when they were trying to reintroduce everything. So my guess is that they're also trying to bring in new readers. And I think, to fans of Batman, we kind of know a lot of these pieces already. But I think as a new reader or someone who's not familiar with Batman entirely, I think this would still hit all the right notes and give you a good understanding of who all these characters are, even without going into like all this in-depth, page and page and page of dialogue for each of these characters and stuff.
Definitely. For a first time reader, I think the only thing that's kind of confusing would be that Harvey Dent, but you can see past that real easily, and it would be perfect for a new reader.
But we know that they weren't watching Zorro, they were watching Space Jam. Sorry, I just needed to shine a light on that. That's my favorite meme.
Well, who knows? With that Space Jam 2 movie, they might retcon all that to happen.
Put Bruce in the audience.
Right when Bill Murray shows up, you just see Batman Bruce just sitting there. Kid Bruce. Big ol' smile on his face right before the worst thing happens.
Jeez. Ouch.
So, back to the book. Over the next few weeks, we see Gordon continuing to try to get Flass into prison. They show the scene that, Grant, you mentioned where Barbara is, taking another phone call of people trying to, break the news to her that Gordon is cheating on her or whatever. And she just calmly is like, yeah, I know, don't bother me again. And you see Gordon kind of in the background looking ashamed that, he's putting Barbara through this.
Yeah.
We see Skeevers almost being killed, being poisoned, and he is on an oxygen mask, but is told he will survive and that he will continue to, give the deets on Flass and all them. And then we see Barbara give birth to a little boy. Yeah, I mean, this hops all over. Selina is shown being upset that her work burglarizing the rich is now being credited to Batman. So she prepares her next heist, this time on the Roman. But she's not the only one who plans on being there at the Roman, because Batman is shown flying in and he's trying to record the Roman speaking with his nephew to get an idea of what the next plan is in place. And Catwoman makes her appearance. But right as they catch Catwoman, showing up right before they attack him, Batman takes them all out pretty damn quick and just tells Catwoman that she wasted his time. And then you see him at Wayne Manor telling Alfred that he almost had the Roman on tape, instructing his nephew, as to what the next plan was had she not interfered. And really, that's the only thing that I feel like Selina had any right point in the story to be on. But even still, I feel like there could have been another way around that and just entirely. And then that is where we see what Roman's plan is. And then he tells his nephew that, while Roman is in the hospital, since Catwoman did a number on him after Batman left, tells his nephew about Gordon and how he just became a father. And then it cuts to Gordon, who is getting a call late at night. And even though he's not supposed to be working, he's told he needs to help Merkel on a case. But Commissioner Loeb isn't being completely honest with him. And so as Gordon's driving away, he sees a motorcyclist driving by him going into the same building that he had driven out of. But Gordon is, very perceptive. He knows that that person has no reason to be in the building. So he gets the idea that this was all a ruse to get him out. So he flips around, he goes back in there, and that is when he sees Roman's nephew in the car holding Gordon's child at knife point. Other men pop out of the car, and Gordon fires a shot off them as, Barbara is being abducted too. And, Gordon takes a shot in the shoulder as well as retaliation. The men drive off with Gordon's baby, and the motorcyclist starts to get back on his bike, but Gordon shoots him too, and then Gordon takes the bike and follows him off. And then as the motorcyclist gets up, Barbara holds him up, and the man says, "Miss Gordon, you have to trust me. I won't let your boy die." And then he steals a bicycle and run, and follows the little car chase going on. And then we see Gordon catching up to the car and fires a bullet to, pop the tire and causing it to crash on the bridge. As Gordon rushes in, he doesn't hear any sounds, including, his child, so he starts panicking immediately. But the nephew surprises Gordon and tries to stab him, and then drops the baby off the bridge. The man who was on the motorcycle pulls up right before then and leaps off the bridge to catch the child, with Barbara right behind him. How Barbara and Bruce were able to, well, you don't know it's Bruce. It's Bruce, though. How they're able to catch up with a motorcycle and a car, I don't quite know, but we'll pass that up. So yeah, motorcycle Bruce jumps off, catches the child, as Gordon and the nephew fall off as well, which is very reminiscent of the Two-Face Dark Knight scene as well.
Oh, true. There is a spot, a shot in the film where Bruce goes running up a bridge to catch the baby. And I don't remember that being in the... I don't remember there being a panel that really showed how Bruce got to like a vantage point to catch the baby. But somehow he ran up the bridge, and I'm still messed up by that image.
Yeah, there's a lot in this scene in particular where I feel like it's just kind of... Not everything is quite pieced together as well as previous issues. But yeah, whatever. At this point, it's just a few pages left to go. So okay, whatever.
They're like, shit, we got to wrap it up.
Suspension of belief, I guess. And so yeah, as everyone falls off the bridge, Gordon and this shadowy figure, kind of see eye to eye. The man hands the baby back over to Gordon, and Gordon says, "I'm practically blind without my glasses. Sirens are coming. You'd better go." And so at this point, I'm wondering if Gordon realizes who it is, and he's just kind of playing dumb to let Bruce get off. I'm not quite sure.
I mean, feels like yes. And I think he's got so many clues. Like really, by now, with all the clues that he has figured up with what Essen said and Barbara said, really, as long as he can make out the figure of Bruce, he can probably realize that that's him and that he's been right.
Yeah, there's always been a part of me that has always thought Gordon already knows who Batman really is and just isn't willing to, damage that relationship at all. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of liked how that all went down. And so the last few pages kind of ties up the rest of the story. Flass, is on trial basically, and they discover that he was holding notes on every conversation he ever had with Commissioner Loeb, which puts Loeb in the hot seat as well, causing him to resign and being replaced with a man named Grogan, who, according to Gordon, is worse than Commissioner Loeb is. Gordon thinks how Roman...
possible?
Yeah, I don't really know. I don't even know if Grogan actually appears at all in future issues either. Name doesn't ring a bell at all. Gordon thinks of how Roman and Roman's sister are at war with each other. He actually mentions that he previously had cases regarding Roman's sister and that she's probably worse than Roman is. And so he's going to have a bit of trouble dealing with his own sister there in Gotham. Gordon also receives a promotion to captain. He mentions that Essen is in New York and doing well. Barbara and Gordon are seeking marriage counseling, and that's going well as well. And then he remarks that things are going well for him, except that someone threatened to poison the Gotham Reservoir. A man named Joker, but he has a friend who can help and someone who will be there any minute. And that's how it ends.
Okay, so I just did a quick look up of Grogan.
Mm-hmm.
He appears in the Telltale games.
Really?
Yeah, he's in he's in episode 5 of season 1. And
Grogan?
he's the one who he gets taken out early in episode 5.
Oh.
Yeah, I've never played the Telltale games, so
I highly recommend them. They're really good, even though it's very easy to fall into the playing as emo Bruce Wayne. Nothing against Troy Baker, but that and he looks Bruce the model of Bruce looks like Archer.
oh,
Yeah, the first season of Telltale Batman is very glitchy and wonky, but it's worth playing for its story alone. And then the second one is a more polished version of a continuation of the story, and it kind of feels the most in Batman season 2 that your choices matter out of any other Telltale series. And it culminates in one of the best finales that I've seen. I can't recall where I put it in my Telltale ranking, but I want to say it was high up there because I do hold it in high regard.
yeah, I think I own both of them, but for whatever reason, there just kind of came a point where I was kind of tired of the Telltale games, especially if you've played, or I don't know about you guys, but once I play one, I want to kind of put another one off. I don't want to jump right back into it. So yeah, I think I had played Tales from the Borderlands. I'm like, I will play the Batman games later, and just never got back around to it.
Yeah, the
Okay, so
I'm looking at it now, and my season 2 was number 8 on the list, but it was a pretty extensive list. Season 1 was at the bottom of my list, the very bottom.
sure about that?
I think so. I'm looking at it right now because I
It's
started with.
It's the first.
No, it's worst to best.
Oh, okay.
It's
I
worst to
thought-
best.
But
So it looks like there's 15 games, and one of them's 15 and one of them's 8. But the 7 before it are pretty fantastic. So that doesn't mean the Enemy Within is bad in any way. I thought it was I thought it was pretty damn. I said, in fact, and I quote, "My only gripe is that the Enemy Within would be a much better film than a video game." And I stand by that. Still go play it. And please go read my piece. Shameless plug. But yes, I think that year 1 ends kind of beautifully. I think that the way that it sums up everything really well, and just the fact that it, like I said in the beginning, it sets up a cliffhanger that then is just the series. It opens the door for you to then go and partake in Batman in any format you wish. And I think that it's really it does a great job of wrapping up the year 1 that you just read, and also just beginning. It in itself is an issue 1. It does it really damn well. And I really have no complaints about the way that it all ends there.
I think that's pretty beautifully put. I think that is where we'll end that before we move on to the legacy of year 1. And with the legacy, the story was met with great success. And as we've mentioned several times already, it's been pretty widely praised, even to this day. At the time, the comics ended up selling double in sales compared to the prior issues, and it basically helped them beat out Marvel Comics for the first time in direct market sales, and had some of the best sales since the 70s, selling an average of 193,000 copies each of the 4 issues. Batman Year One would basically be the go-to origin for many of the people who followed up on his adventures in the early career. As we mentioned, Batman Year Two would be written, though eventually forgotten. And books like The Long Halloween, Dark Victory, The Man Who Laughs, and more would all have some sort of basis in the Year One story. Even elements of film and the TV would include this. Alan, I know you've talked plenty about Gotham, as how Batman Year One has influenced it in some ways. Batman Begins and The Dark Knight also have references, quite clear references, such as calling the bats when he was during the attack with the police to get him out of there. The end of Batman Begins kind of ends very similarly to this, where he calls Batman in to get help with the Joker. The part where at the bridge where Gordon is fighting with someone who is basically risking the life of his child matches what happens with Two-Face at the end of Dark Knight, stuff like that. And then of course the animated version of Batman Year One, which was also well received, and as far as I know, since I was not able to watch it, is pretty faithful, right?
Oh, the
Yeah.
movie, the movie feels like a poetic reciting of the book. Like it really, I kind of wish that I was reading alongside it while I watched it, because it just seemed like verbatim scenes happen. I could recall certain panels looking exactly the same as they did animated. Like it's super good. My only qualms with it are that Bruce is just terribly voice acted. My God. And and weirdly with that, there's a lot less Bruce monologue in the film. Like you would see specifically, I recall the thing where Batman takes down those kids on the rafter, and it's like in the book there was a lot more of his inner workings of his mind being explained and how he was going to go about it, and in the movie he just jumps onto the railing. Like there's no looking into how he's working. He just shows up and he's reckless, and that's great for the fact that his voice acting is terrible and I don't want to hear more of it. But also I think that it's pretty cool in that it just shows off like this is how he does. He was acting without thinking. But yeah, I wish that I watched the movie first, just because I feel like oddly watching the movie so recently after reading it felt like replaying a video game to me. Why would I go back and do it again? And it was like it's a little over an hour. It's just this short little thing that just felt exactly like the book I had just read. So maybe I would have appreciated it even more if I watched it later on or before I read the book. But now that I'm here, I still appreciate them both for what they are, and I think that it is pretty, as you said, a faithful adaptation to it.
Good. Alan, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, this is more of the impact that, the current impact that James Gordon would have. Like I was, like in the more recent stuff with Batman, the Batman Who Laughs, how Gordon and his son James Gordon Jr. are very integral to that series, and I'm not gonna I won't spoil things, but they introduce during Dark Knight's Metal, they introduced a pantheon of evil Batman from the Dark Multiverse, and obviously the Batman Who Laughs is one of them. He's basically the Batman fused with the Joker, who looks like he is into some weird stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they introduced a character called the Grim Knight, who is basically Batman and the Punisher fused together, who just decides to solve all his problems with guns.
Hmm.
And Batman basically the Grim Knight rules Gotham with an iron fist, and Gordon is the one who opposes him, and he pretty much goes through everything. Like, I'm not sure if it's every planet, like every version of him, but in the Dark Multiverse, he goes through and kills every single version of Gordon.
Huh.
What?
Yeah, it was written by Scott Snyder, and actually, no, I'm not sure if it was Scott Snyder or James Tynion the fourth, but nonetheless, Gordon gets captured, and they have to basically use James Gordon Jr., who Graydon, do you know anything about James Gordon Jr.?
I don't think so.
Josh, do you know anything about James Gordon Jr.?
Yeah, he's a bit of a psychopath.
Oh,
So-
yeah, look at that.
Yeah, so he's one of the, like, he's on Wayne core like meds that are treating his insanity, and basically cures him of, like, it cures him, but he still it's sort of like being awake in a dream, or awake during a dream. Like, you're well aware of what's happening in your head, but you're not doing anything about it. And basically, something bad happens to Gordon. So I want to thank DC Comics, #sponsored, #ad. No, I'm kidding. We don't have the numbers for that.
We haven't even released an episode yet.
Yeah, these are still just behind the scenes.
Well, before we do release any episodes, let's finish this one up. The last thing I want to talk about is the movie that was supposed to come out of this book. Obviously we got the animated film, but there was supposed to be a live movie that came out prior to Batman Begins that was supposed to take heavily from this book.
Is this the one that I've been seeing like teasers for, about like a documentary coming out, and like the R-rated Batman that should have been?
Oh, maybe I haven't seen anything about that.
Oh, I think they're making a documentary about the Year One movie.
That would be cool. I'd watch that. So yeah,
I'll
so
continue.
the idea of that was that Frank Miller was supposed to be working with Darren Aronofsky, who people might recognize him with Requiem for a Dream or Black Swan, Mother.
Or the wrestler.
Do what?
The wrestler.
The wrestler. Yeah, and so those two were supposed to bring a Batman Year One type story to the big screens, in an attempt to reboot the character after what many people disliked in Batman and Robin. Much like Batman Begins, Christian Bale was supposed to be the Batman here as well. But Miller and Aronofsky didn't quite see eye to eye as to how it would work. But they did write up a screenplay together. Aronofsky found Miller's Batman too soft, and Miller didn't like the idea that Batman would torture people, which was more of Aronofsky's version. But, they were able to work something out. They were still able to get, a screenplay put together. And then in 2001, WB would decline it anyway because it wasn't kid-friendly enough. And Frank Miller did an interview with Hollywood Reporter in which he had a little quote to kind of describe the movie. And this is it here. It didn't have the toys in it. The Batmobile is just a tricked out car. And Batman turned his back on his fortune to live a street life so he could know what people were going through. He built his own Batcave in an abandoned part of the subway. He created Batman out of whole cloth to fight crime and a corrupt police force. Some changes in the film from the comic, and I will post the leaked transcript in the notes for this episode when we finally get around to posting it. So, for instance, Selena Kyle would have been black. Alfred would also, Alfred technically wouldn't exist. There would instead be a black man named Little Repair Shop and mentors Bruce. Bruce develops the Batman name after a ring he wore while fighting had an intertwined T and W for Thomas Wayne that looked like a bat. And then the Batmobile was actually a Lincoln Continental. So those are just some of the changes for this idea of what that movie would have been.
I mean, with the Nick Cage Superman movie that never was, Chris Rock was going to play Jimmy Olsen. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. Perry White, ended up being Lawrence Fishburne, in the Man of Steel movie and all that, and
I'm still shocked that they. Part of me wants to see what Hugh Laurie could have brought to the role because he was supposed to be in Superman Returns.
Oh, mm-hmm.
But then had to be, but he was doing he had some other commitment, and was replaced by Frank Langella sometime before the film came out.
Yeah, and today, today, the day that we're actually recording this, it's August 22nd, and this is when the DC Fandom was done, and they showed the first trailer for the new, the Batman movie that's coming out in 2021, and some of this sounds like it could be in line with that, from, I think if I remember right, there's this cutscene in the trailer where some of his stuff is in like an abandoned subway, I think. The Batmobile is not a Batmobile. It is a tricked out car and stuff like that. So I think a lot of, Batman Year One, even though the movie version of it is still carrying over into a movie that has not yet released yet.
Yeah, and I actually did a little research here as you were chatting, and I found that apparently what I was thinking of was that IGN, 4 days ago, released a 15-minute documentary they made about the movie that you're talking about.
Oh.
So, if you want a little more backstory, it seems they just did a piece on that, which is pretty cool.
I'll have to look that up, and I'll put that in the links as well. I'll find it once I'm done with this here.
All right.
But yeah, that's it. That's all I have for Batman Year One. Is there anything else you guys want to add, or are we good to wrap it up?
Let me just quick look at my notes here of what I had taken away from things, but I think we touched on everything. Yeah, just in my short little summary, I'm glad I finally got around to reading it. I never really had a real jumping on point of where I assumed I would start looking at Batman stuff. I mean, I've asked people in the past for things, and I have a couple issues that my dad has had. I have Death in the Family kicking around somewhere here, and I wanted to pick it up and read it and just never did. But
That's
now I've started.
That's the worst place to start.
Really? I thought people don't like that one.
Which one was it? Death of the Family or Death in the Family?
Oh, there's two?
Yeah, there was one. There's the one where Jason Todd dies.
I think
there's the one that was released during New 52.
Oh, it's definitely from the 80s, 90s or whenever. It's old. I think it's got him holding Jason Todd on the front?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that one. So yeah, but yes, I'm glad that I went out and I got this, and and have started diving into newer things, broadening my horizons. I also have Watchmen here that I bought recently, and I'm finally gonna read that too, and I'm excited. But yes, this was cool. This was fun to go and read some Batman for once and take part in what you guys love so much. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for coming on.
Of course.
And then, if you ever need any recommendations, we're more than happy to pass
Yes,
them
I would.
along to you.
I would love to take you up on some.
Alan, is there anything else you want to add before we get to the outro?
Yeah. Essen would eventually come back to into Gordon's life.
Really?
Yeah. She leaves for New York City at the end of the story, or some point during the story. And Danny O'Neill wanted to bring her back, or wanted to revive the character. And let's just say that it wasn't well, or I'm not sure if it was well received, but it's just one of those things that certain characters made, like, that were created by Frank Miller and that were handled in an attempt to be like Frank Miller, like wrote it.
Oh, they tried to like continue the character that he made but didn't do it right.
Pretty much. Let me just. Okay, so she returned to the Batman's. She returned in story in 1991, and her and Gordon got together, and they actually get married in Legends of the Dark Knight Annual issue 2. And she sort of has a iconic death.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
She's killed by the Joker,
Oh.
and it's right at the end of No Man's Land, which I mentioned earlier as one of the, as like in the pantheon of great Batman stories.
Huh.
So, like, the way she dies is pretty messed up.
Yes, it was.
Like, she has the Joker at gunpoint, and the Joker throws a baby at her. Sarah Essen catches the child, and the Joker just then shoots her in the head. That's it. And after saying "Merry Christmas,"
Jesus.
and he's like, and he has like, and usually when Joker kills people, he's happy, like he's having a time of his life. He has a visible frown, like he did not enjoy doing what he did.
Oh wow.
Or it was. I'm pretty sure, like, if he had the opportunity to do something else, he would have done something else.
Wow. That is brutal.
He straight up surrenders when the police arrive, and Gordon wanted to kill Joker, but instead shoots him in the leg. But he then finds that he laughs at. He gets his smile back because of something he did in The Killing Joke, which I highly recommend, Graydon. And as of the New 52, Essen does not exist in the DC universe.
Wow. She's just Legends material now.
Well, after Infinite Crisis kind of undid Crisis on Infinite Earths, they retconned the marriage to be a little earlier. So.
So there you have it.
There you have it.
And also, one of the things I want to say, if it weren't for Danny O'Neill, may he rest in peace, things would have gotten worse. Like either Batman or Detective would have gotten canceled, and comics would look a lot different. Which is ironic because Julia Schwartz sort of did something similar to what, or Danny O'Neill did something similar to what Julie Schwartz did, in that Julie Schwartz is responsible basically for the Silver Age of comics. But I'll talk about that on another episode because it is Way too late.
Yeah, I don't want you guys to be stuck around here too long because I know you guys are an hour ahead. It's already after midnight to you.
Yeah, we got to record a podcast in like 11 hours.
Wait, I always forget that you're on a different time zone. Because
Yep.
you were like, it's August 22nd, and I was like, no, it's not. Actually, it's not.
23rd now. All right. Well, let me wrap up, and you guys can all go to bed. So yeah, thank you guys for tuning in to this episode with Batman Year One. Please rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. Any and all love is appreciated. Please, if there's a way that we can make the show better, please let us know. The only way we will improve is if you tell us what we can do to improve.
What if they request I leave the show?
Then I'm sorry, Alan. I'm going to disappoint some viewers and keep you on.
Woo!
And behind the scenes magic, but what if they request changes in the first week and you've already got like 6 episodes back?
Well, yeah, I've thought about that actually. I'm like,
expect to see your changes in a couple months.
yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, it might not be an immediate change, but I will pay attention regardless, and at some point the change will be made.
So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Also, we do have a Twitter. You can follow us at Hypertime Pod on there. If you have any questions or topic suggestions, feel free to post them on there for us. Or you can also email us at hypertime2podcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is JMILLE99. Alan, where can they follow you at?
They can follow me on Twitter at the Alamir, where I tweet about. Well, 9 times out of 10, I'll start drafting a tweet, but then I just end up deleting it because I just don't want to get swatted.
I don't know what you plan on tweeting. It must be pretty bad.
It's based. I'm just critical stuff of the president.
Yeah,
and how
yeah.
I'm gonna have to start. I think I'm gonna have to start unfollowing a bunch of people I follow due to me, do all this stuff I'm here, I see daily.
Yeah, I feel you there. Graydon, how about you? Where can they follow you at? Assuming you want people to follow you.
You can follow me at Greatlow. That's GRAYTLO 777. That's 3 7s. I will say I've been more active on Twitter recently with this website than I ever have in my life. So if you want to see my insane ramblings and occasionally a deal on video games that I enjoy that I retweet, go check me out there.
Yeah, and also don't forget to follow us on VGU.tv. God knows what's going to be on there when this episode posts, but still, check it out. And with that, the episode is over. Take care, and we will see you further down the Hypertime. Bye!